This is Bumper to Bumper, the car show. Drive in anxious and cruise out confident. With the best automotive information for your vehicle. And now your hosts, Matt Allen and Dave Riccio.
Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Bumper Radio. I am Dave Riccio, and Matt Allen decided to take a day off, get a little R&R. So today I am your KTAR car guy. Bumper to Bumper Radio is every Saturday from 11 to noon, right here on News 92.3. At Bumper to Bumper Radio, we're helping you, the motoring public, have a better overall car experience. So if you got car questions, we've got car answers. So we encourage you to give us a call at 602-277-5827, 602-277-KTAR. You can also text us at 411-923, and you're probably still hearing me say, we're going to help you and us. That's because I've got Jon Riggle, who works with me at Tri-City Transmission and Auto Repair, and Jon diagnoses every car that comes through the door, and he's been doing it for 40 years, 39 maybe, 39, 40, something like that. Yeah. Started out back in 1978 at Valley Dodge.
That's right.
Got the name of it.
Yeah.
Boy, some people haven't probably heard that name in a long time. So anyhow, today on the Bumper to Bumper Roadmap, by the way, good to have you here, Jon.
Thank you.
Always good. Today on the roadmap, we're going to be doing a little bit of, we'll take one of your emails from bumpertobumperradio.com, of course, open phones and text. And then, Jon, I thought it would be appropriate because it seems like we had a rash of this in our shop, and it's wiring problems and how many issues. I mean,
this was the week for it. Yeah, just one right after another, just kind of piled up in there.
And I always think of people running into the local auto parts, Acme Auto Parts, and because there are little yellow check engine lights on, and those people scan it. And they always give you a piece of paper that says you got a P0741 code, and then they give you a little description, torque converter clutch stuck off.
Yeah.
And then they give you this other explanation, says it could be a torque converter solenoid, it could be a bad torque converter, it could be the wiring, or it could be the computer.
Right.
So that's a pretty big...
That's a pretty big selection of things, yeah.
That is for sure. And when a car's fairly new, we're not really looking for wiring problems.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as common. The newer the car is, the more accurate the code is going to kind of get you closer to the problem.
Yeah.
The earlier the model of the car, and it's got 80,000 miles on it, or 100,000 miles on it, maybe 200,000 miles on it, wiring becomes the issue. And that's, Jon, how much wiring is in a car?
Probably something close to a mile. They figure like 55 pounds of wire, copper wire in a low-end car.
That's a lot of wiring. And sometimes people wonder, what the heck are the diagnostic charges for? Well, you're looking for a wiring problem. And wiring is not always easy to get to.
Yeah.
And all these problems that we had were at the back of the engine block, up above the top of the bell housing. There's no way to get your hands in there.
You can't see it. Yeah.
So one of them we had was I think it was a Lincoln Aviator. And what we had to do to fix this one, and they came in for a transmission problem. And, of course, the phone call from the customer. Hey, how much is it to put a transmission into my Aviator?
Yeah.
Well, it's really expensive if you don't need one.
Yep.
But let's diagnose this thing first because you maybe jumping into conclusions here. And that one was wiring, and the lady just had an engine job done.
Yep, sure did.
And so that connection between the engine and transmission is hard for any technician to get to. It's right there up against the firewall. And all you got to do is, when you're putting that motor in, is just bump that wiring. It's just part of the repair. It's going to happen. And so here she is a month later, and she thinks she needs a transmission. And Jon's testing it out, and he goes, I got a code for this, and everything electrically tests good. But when he started jiggle testing, that's a test that we commonly do in our industry. The jiggle test, while looking at the voltmeter, and things were jumping around. They didn't look so good. Carrie's laughing. The jiggle test doesn't sound... Well, yeah, definitely the jiggle test. So that was one of them. The other one was a Cadillac. Same thing. Guy called, how much for a transmission, or my transmission is not working right. The engine was even running bad.
Mm-hmm.
And so... Actually, I'm thinking of all these we had this week. And same thing. And Jon, I don't know how you were able to find that, but you found a bad ground wire at the back of the intake?
Yeah, at the back of the intake manifold, there was a ground wire that was just attached by one little strand of wire, and it was just enough to carry the current most of the time. But when the situation got right and the load became right, the car would act up and stall and not shift right and do all kinds of crazy stuff.
So if you guys have ever had a weird intermittent issue, I don't know how many times wiring shows up because it's rubbing on something. Sometimes it grounds out. Sometimes it's, open. Sometimes it's shorted. It does all these different things. And they became, you had one that was a power window issue.
Yep.
What were you working on?
That was a 2007 Dodge truck with a power window that wouldn't work. And the wires were broken inside the door jamb, but the wires were actually broken inside the insulation in the wires. So even when you pulled the sheathing back, you couldn't see where the wire was broken.
It looked clean. So,
Yep.
so sometimes, that's when we say we got a code or we got the symptom or we kind of know the direction within that 1 mile of wiring. In other words, if you took the wiring and you put it all end to end, it would go out the length of a mile. That's 5,280 feet, something like
Yep.
that. That's a lot of wiring. So we have, thank goodness for codes. It tells us, hey, it's in the first 1,000 feet of wiring. Okay,
Yeah.
You just made that a whole lot easier for me.
Yeah.
And 1,000 feet's great, but you're chasing it, and every time you open the door and shut the door, this thing is changing, right?
Yeah.
So you think you got it diagnosed. You're like, oh, it's a bad master switch. I got that. No problem, right? Then you shut the door and you come back to it and you test it again, and what? Now something else is not working.
Yeah, completely different. Yeah.
So these are the things that we go to, in our shop. They happen all the time, and it's one of those things you pay for diagnostic. And again, if the car's new, but I've even seen it on a new car. Randy, who used to work for me, he had this Toyota Camry that he bought brand new, and for the longest time he had this mysterious problem where something wouldn't work. And then what ended up, he fixed it like after he had the car for 6 years. They finally found it when they assembled the car, where the wiring harness passed through the firewall. There was a little edge that caught.
Yep.
It just was working on that wire. So we had that one, and really the winner for the week because people they swing by the local auto parts store because their little check engine light's on and the transmission's not working. So we do a lot of transmissions, and they go there and the guy says, "Oh yeah, you've got all these solenoid codes." So the customer says, okay, great. He calls me up on the phone, answer phone, hey, Tri-City Transmission. And he says, hey, how much for a solenoid in my 2000, what year was that, F-150?
2 or 3, I think.
2002, 2003. How much for a solenoid in my 2002, 2003? I said, well, I don't know. Which one do you need? He goes, well, I got a code for a torque converter solenoid. I got a code for an EPC solenoid. I got a code for both shift solenoids. And he goes down the list. And I said, well, all those solenoids being bad would be like every light bulb in your house going out at one time.
Yeah, not likely.
So I'm going to save you some effort in calling around to get prices on solenoids. Why don't you just come down and let me diagnose it? Let's do that first. And so I gave it to John, and because I knew he had an electrical problem. I had my suspicions already on the phone. And here this guy was. He probably was thinking, well, maybe I need a transmission, but I'm pretty sharp. I'm going to go get the codes first, and maybe I just need a solenoid and all that stuff. And John, what was missing from his equation?
The fuse.
The fuse was missing. And it's in a spot where, how many times does a cigarette lighter fuse pop?
A lot.
Somebody gets a foil gum wrapper in the cigarette lighter, and the thing pops, right? So everyone knows, hey, you just go in the fuse box, you can change out your cigarette lighter fuse.
Yeah, just take another fuse out and put it right in there.
And just move it over, right?
Yeah.
So that's what he did. So here he is thinking he needs a transmission or at least a solenoid or something like that. And all he needed was a fuse. We didn't really have the heart to tell him, so we just told him we had an open circuit, and John corrected it.
There you go. Yeah, there was an open circuit.
And he was happy to get his car fixed for the $78 diagnostic charge.
Yeah.
So we had the fuse guy, we had the Cadillac, we had the Aviator, and then we had another one, and that one was a Ford Explorer Sport Track, I think, or just
It was a regular Explorer, yeah.
Regular Explorer. And we repaired this guy's transmission. We're putting it all back together, and we go on 3 road tests when we're done. And it started doing really weird things and setting really weird codes, and they were always different. They were those codes like, well, it was just that. Now how come it's this? And so it went back into John's bay to diagnose it, and John started looking, and again, the wiggle and the jiggle test. We can't actually see the wires, just by looking at them. There's plastic that's wrapped around those wires. And then behind the plastic, you have the wire, which is copper wire with rubber insulation around it. Mm-hmm. And once he peeled back the tape that holds the plastic sheath on there, so to say,
Yeah.
you find out that these wirings, literally the rubber's coming right off the top of the wiring.
Yeah, it's just like turns into like potato chips, and it just flakes right off of the wires, and then the wires start to touch, and we wind up with problems that are
all kinds of weird codes, and I've seen that on Explorer before, and this is one of the things that I wanted to bring up, because there's things that happen over wiring harnesses, things that happen to your car that you don't know is going on. When you have oil leaks and it's leaking on wires, it ruins the wires, and it makes for some hard diagnostic problem down the road, and it's really expensive if you got to do a whole harness. Rodents also come up, and by the way, there's a guy in Cave Creek that sells this thing called Rid-A-Rat, and it's a strobe light you put under your hood.
Yep.
And the rodents can't stand it, so they don't chew your wires. But that's a major problem if you live up in Carefree area or out in Gilbert somewhere. It's just these rats going in, and there's something about the wiring that they're attracted to.
Yep.
So rodents. The other thing is motor mounts. People come and say, "Yeah, I don't want motor mounts." Okay, fine. Just so you know, if you keep driving around, well, we're just going to run it till it's dead. Well, you're going to kill it sooner than it needs to be. If your motor's kind of flopping around, I mean, when motor mounts break, the engine's not going to pop out of the car by any means, but it's moving twice as far. Now, there's things that are connected to the engine that are connected to the body of the car. So when that thing stretches those wires, there's a chafing that goes on. So you don't want to ignore motor mounts. Don't want to ignore leaks, and if you live in some of those areas, you might think about, I think I'll put that up on our Facebook page, that Rid-A-Rat, because it works pretty good. It's magnetic, and I had a friend that was trying to stick it underneath his hood, and he couldn't get it to stick. It was an F-150. It was aluminum, a whole new problem that no one saw coming. So anyhow, the other thing that comes up is batteries. Batteries, and you've got battery wires and cables, and you have a crummy battery. Those things will leak acid down on wiring harnesses. That's the other thing that does damage. I mean, I don't know how many times, because they put the battery right over top of the transmission because it fits there.
Yeah.
And then the transmission wiring is right there. I don't know how many times people have come in thinking they need a transmission. All it was a bad battery, because it's leaking acid. So batteries are one of those things you don't want to go cheap on. You want a good battery, like an Interstate battery. That's what we carry at our shop. We like to carry it there because of the great warranty, and then it's coast to coast. And Interstate's been around for a long time. So anyhow, when we come back, you've got myself. I can answer a lot of questions, but you got somebody better than me. That's Jon Riggle. He knows anything about cars in the last 40 years. He's your guy. 602-277-5827, 602-277-KTR. Whether you got a vibration, a weird wiring problem, anything like that, you listen to